A first psychotic break often doesn't look like what people imagine from movies. It can be subtle at first: paranoia, isolation, not sleeping, and talking in ways that don't quite make sense. But once it happens, it is terrifying, both for the person experiencing it and for the people around them. But it's often much more quiet than you might think. People hear the phrase psychotic break and imagine movie scenes, violent outbursts, people screaming in the street, something out of control and terrifying. A first psychotic break is much more complicated than that. It can start with sleepless nights and insomnia, maybe odd little comments that don't quite make sense, or a young adult who suddenly pulls away from their family and friends and starts to isolate. And then one day, the break happens. A line is crossed. Reality itself bends, and nothing feels stable anymore after that. Today, I want to talk about what a first psychotic break really is, why it happens, how it presents, and why the way we respond to it makes all the difference. A first psychotic break, also called first episode psychosis, is the very first time someone experiences psychosis in a way that disrupts their daily life. Psychosis itself simply means a break from reality. Hallucinations, delusions, or severe thought disorganization or thought disruptions, and altered thought content. Maybe bizarre thought content. It often shows up in the late teens to late 20s. That's the window when the brain is still wiring and pruning itself, and stress or genetics or environmental factors can all collide. While many people associate psychotic breaks with schizophrenia, the truth is they can have multiple origins and they can happen in multiple conditions, including schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, major depression with psychosis or major depression with psychotic features, or triggered by substances and even medical illnesses. So, what's happening in the brain? A lot of research points to dysregulation of dopamine, especially in the mesolimbic pathway. This is the circuit that shapes motivation, reward, and perception of salience. Basically, the brain starts tagging random things as important or meaningful when they aren't, which can fuel paranoia or those bizarre beliefs. We also know that early trauma, chronic stress, and neurodevelopmental differences can set the stage. Genes and hereditary factors matter as well. If you have a close relative with schizophrenia or schizoaffective or bipolar disorder, your risk is higher. Add in factors like heavy cannabis use, stimulant abuse, or even things like certain infections like strep and neuroinflammation, and the brain's balance can easily tip. A psychotic break isn't usually from one single cause. It's a storm of vulnerabilities that finally collide. Most first psychotic breaks don't come out of nowhere, honestly. There's usually a prodrome or a prodromal period, like an early warning phase. Here's what it can look like. The person might have trouble sleeping. Sometimes they stay up for days at a time, pulling away and isolating from friends, and this can increase more and more. Suddenly their grades start slipping at school, or they're having problems focusing or completing tasks at work. odd beliefs or magical thinking, which are ideas that don't fit reality but aren't yet full delusions. And then they might experience anxiety, depression, irritability. And then the speech or thought patterns might be slightly off or harder to follow, because families often look back and realize we saw it, we just didn't know what it was. Recognizing these signs early can sometimes mean getting help before the break fully hits. During the break itself, reality unravels. Some people hear voices. Sometimes these voices are like whispers. Sometimes full conversations. Maybe they hear others in the hall talking about them, or plotting or conspiring against them. Others see things, feel things crawling on their skin, or believe their thoughts are being broadcast out loud, or that their phones are being tapped and the government is listening, or the CIA is listening and that they have a special interest in them. They might have paranoia that the government is tracking them, or grandiose beliefs that they've been chosen for a divine mission. Speech can become disorganized, jumping from one idea to another in ways that don't connect. Emotions can also swing wildly, from fear to rage to confusion to happiness to euphoria, sometimes back and forth. And for families, it can feel like watching a loved one suddenly transform into someone they don't even recognize. Often, a first break ends with hospitalization. Sometimes through the ER, sometimes after a crisis call or an arrest. And that moment, that very first hospitalization, becomes one of the most defining experiences in someone's mental health journey. Here's the important part. A first psychotic break does not mean the end of a full life. It does not mean the end of a full life. With early intervention, recovery is possible. Specialized programs called coordinated specialty care or early intervention in psychosis services are game changers where these services are available. They combine medication, therapy, family education, school or work support, and case management services. Research has shown that people in these programs have far better overall outcomes, like fewer relapses, less disability, and more chance of finishing school, holding jobs and careers, and maintaining relationships that are meaningful. But here's the catch. Timing does matter. The longer psychosis goes untreated, the harder it is to fully recover, because the more ingrained those delusions and bizarre beliefs become. There's even a phrase for it, the duration of untreated psychosis, or DUP. The longer the DUP, the worse the long-term prognosis is, which is why recognizing and responding quickly is so critical. For the person going through it, a first psychotic break can feel terrifying, surreal, even cosmic. Imagine your mind insisting on a reality no one else can see. Imagine not being sure what's real anymore. Imagine not knowing if your neighbors are outside the door talking about you or planning an attack on you, or not knowing if there are cameras set up watching you in your apartment, or that the government has inserted a chip into your body and that they're tracking you. For families, it can bring grief, fear, confusion, and stigma. Parents sometimes blame themselves Friends may back away. Stigma can be brutal. But I've also seen resilience. I've seen people stabilize, find meaning, finish school, fall in love, start families, build careers. The break is not the end. It's just a turning point. And what happens next, whether they're met with compassion and early treatment or stigma and delay, that's what shapes the story. A first psychotic break is not just a psychiatric crisis, it's a crossroads. With the right help, people can move forward, rebuild, and live full lives. But without awareness, stigma, or access to resources, we risk losing that chance altogether. So if you notice the warning signs in yourself or someone you love, don't wait. Reach out. Early recognition saves lives, and early treatment changes futures and entire life trajectories. Thank you for being here today. I'll see you next time.